who coordinates our food systems working group. I just wanted to get through a couple of quick housekeeping items. We've got everybody on mute, but we do really want to hear from you during our discussion period at the end of the hour. So please raise your hand by clicking on the icon if you have a question or comment, and we'll call on you. Or if you prefer, you can type a question into the questions box, and we'll be getting through those at the end as well. If you join the audio via your computer, you'll need a microphone to speak into the audio. But if you join by telephone, you'll also need to enter the audio pin that's listed in your control panel. Feel free to send us a question if you have any need for help with audio during the session. So we're recording today's webinar, and we'll be posting the recording and the presentation slides on our website. We'll be sending you the link with that for that in a follow-up email a few days after the webinar, and really encourage you to share that link with interested colleagues who weren't able to join us today. So if you have any technical issues or difficulties during the call, feel free to send us a question, or you can call GoToWebinar at the number listed. And I just wanted to turn the floor over to the Executive Director of the Public Health Alliance of Southern California, Tracy Delaney, to introduce our speaker today.
Great. Well, thank you, Katie. Thanks very much. And welcome to all of you that joined our webinar. I had the privilege of seeing Brad earlier this year in San Diego. I believe he was consulting with one of our cities in North County, and in the evening he had a community presentation that I attended. And his presentation made such an impression on me in terms of realizing the transformative power of water and the great potential for integrated design. And for me, it was an aha moment because I could really see how his innovative work could and hopefully will soon connect with what we do in local health departments, particularly around the built environment. So Brad, thank you for joining us. Brad is a dynamic teacher, consultant, and designer of regenerative systems that sustainably enhance local resources and our global potential. He's the author of an award-winning, best-selling book, Rainwater Harvesting for Dry Lands and Beyond, which I have purchased, and it really is wonderful. He has a website with lots of information, harvestingrainwater.com, and he's also the co-founder of Desert Harvesters, which strives to repopulate Tucson's urban core with rain-irrigated indigenous food plants. Brad, thank you so much for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to you. Welcome.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate this opportunity. So what I will be talking to you all about today is how we can capitalize on the potential that all our communities already have to enhance the ecological foundation upon which we all depend in a way that not only enhances the health of our ecosystem, but also the health of all our citizens. So let's see, here we go. Okay, so I'll start by quickly telling a story of my community of Tucson because I think it's similar to the situation of many communities in California. So these two photographs compare conditions about 100 years apart. So the black and white photo taken about 100 years ago, Tucson, although it's a dry land community, has an over 4,000-year continuous history of farming. And that's in part due to our once more readily available water. We used to have the Santa Cruz River flowing year-round through the community. We had abundant artesian wells and springs because the groundwater table was quite shallow, just 20 feet below the surface. We had abundant riparian forests that acted like living sponges, absorbing and infiltrating the rain into the soil. But due to our mismanagement of the watershed in less than 100 years, we lost all that. We killed the river, killed the springs, the artesian wells, and the forest also died as the roots could no longer access the groundwater, which was dropping. It's dropped over 300 feet in just 100 years and continues to drop. So if we look more closely at our community and its watershed, we see that we seem to be a hydrophobic society, a culture that's afraid of water. Because whether or not it's conscious, the way we are creating our infrastructure in the built environment, it very efficiently drains and thus dehydrates our community of its most valuable and precious resource, water. The photograph on the right, you can see a typical home. Water is drained off the roof, past the landscape, into the street. The guns of Navarone-like drains shoot the water out of the system. So this literally dries out our already dry communities, but at the same time, when it does rain, it leads to dysentery or flooding, because now that our watersheds are more compact and paved, they're no longer sponge-like. Instead, they're now drain-like. So floods that used to occur every 100 years, we find are now occurring every 10 years. But the rainfall pattern has not changed. The only thing that's changed is the condition of the watershed. In fact, the photograph on the right is my neighbor after he passed 2 cars on First Street, which becomes a river anytime there's a good storm. So there's a positive for extreme sports enthusiasts. So the next slide here, because Tucson and so many other communities are not taking advantage of the free gift of rain that falls on our community, instead we're draining it away, we're having to look, well, we're choosing to look ever further and further away to get water and bring it into our communities. So the photograph in the upper left is of the Central Arizona Project Canal. This brings water from the Colorado River to Phoenix and Tucson. It's over 300 miles long, and we have to pump that water up over 3,000 feet. Since water is heavy, this canal has become the single largest consumer of electricity in the state of Arizona and the single largest emitter of carbon. And at the same time, it's contributing to the death of a much greater river, the Colorado River. So now the flow of the Colorado seldom makes it to the Sea of Cortez, and thus we are contributing to the decline and slow death of the ecology of that sea, which is so dependent on the freshwater nutrient inputs via the river. So this next slide, you see white rings around some newly planted plants in a landscape in Tucson. This is salt that has been deposited from the irrigation water. So as we take ever more water from the Colorado, and as we pump water from ever deeper depths of our groundwater table, the water gets ever more salty. In fact, just since 1990, when we started using Colorado River water, the salt content of our aquifer has almost doubled because of Colorado water we're inputting into the aquifer. So the more salt we add to our soils, the harder it is for plants to uptake water, and the harder it is for plants to photosynthesize. So due to the water we're using, we're really harming the health of the soil and the vegetation. The good news is rainwater has practically no salts, so it can actually flush those salts out. And this is where I see hope and good news. So in Tucson, we get 11 inches of rain a year, similar to many communities in Southern California. And yet more rain falls on the surface area of our community than the entire population of almost 1 million residents consumes of municipal or utility water in a typical year. And the situation's very similar throughout California. I give some stats for Los Angeles. There you don't get more rain falling on the community than the community uses, but still it's very significant the amount of rain you get. So in Los Angeles, the average person is consuming 123 gallons of municipal water per person per day. But if you look at how much rain falls on the community, divide that by the population in 365 days a year, there's 85 gallons of rainwater per person per day falling on the city of Los Angeles. Now the trick is the rain's not always falling, so you got to figure out how to capture it when it does fall and make it available those times when it's not falling, which I'll cover. So I see we can shift from the path to scarcity, which most of us are on, to the path to abundance with very simple strategies. So on the path to scarcity, we typically in our landscapes plant on these mound-like shapes or these slopes that drain all the water off-site. And This then picks up sediment as the water is flowing across the landscape, and we create sediment-laden flood flows downstream. We also create this thing called wastewater. Anytime there's a waste in any system, that's a problem. So how do we flip that to a resource? I'll cover that in just a moment. In the scarcity path on the left, 30 to 70% of household drinking water is used to irrigate the landscape. It's a crazy waste, considering how much money and resources we use to purify that water, deliver it at a drinking water quality, and then we just put it immediately into the dirt. So I think the landscape is where we've got huge potential to harvest other on-site waters, use them instead of drinking water, and we don't have to worry about purifying it to drinking water standards because we're using it for the landscape. So on the path to abundance, simple shift. Instead of planting on mounds, we plant within or beside sunken basin-like shapes that capture the rainfall rather than draining the rainfall. Raised pathways and roofs, they can drain their runoff into these same basins. So that runoff becomes run-on, which infiltrates, and that's right on. These basins also capture leaf drop, so we get a closed nutrient loop. The leaf drop and all decomposes back into the soil and enhances the health of both the soil and plants. And in times of no rain, we can take that so-called wastewater, the household gray water, and direct it to the landscape. So these rain garden basins in times of no rain become gray water harvesting basins. So with this scenario, instead of drinking water, rainwater becomes the primary irrigation source. Gray water and air conditioning condensate are the secondary irrigation sources. And drinking water, if used at all, is only a supplementary source, not the sole or primary source. In this way, instead of being scared in the city on the path to scarcity, we get so happy about how good things can shift that we want to do a little dance, and so our buns do a jiggle on the path to a bun dance. And so here we see how you could set up such a landscape around a single-family household. You create these basin-like shapes 10 feet away from the foundation so you don't saturate the soil under the building, and then slope everything to the basins. At maturity, it creates a nice oasis effect for passive cooling and reducing of utility costs around the home as well. And if you look at the color photograph below, this just mimics something you can see throughout the West, where along the road here in an area so dry we only have creosote plants, there's a linear forest of mesquite and acacia trees that nobody plants and nobody takes care of, nobody waters. How's that possible where you otherwise don't have trees? It's possible because you've got the rainwater falling from the sky caught in the swale along the road, and that swale is also capturing the runoff from the road. So we increase available rainfall by 2 to 3 times where the trees are located. So within these basin-like shapes, these earthworks, these rain gardens, we want to create a living sponge. We don't want bare earth, or we're going to get puddles, and if we have puddles that last for more than 3 days, we have mosquitoes. So we don't want that. We want to quickly get infiltration. So on the left is kind of my nightmare vision. With good intentions, the guy put in a lot of rock and gravel in this landscape, but he seems to think he has to vacuum up the leaf drop to, so he doesn't cover his investment. So he's literally strip mining the nutrients and the organic matter, the sponge matter of his landscape, and creating a drier conditions. Whereas on the right, this guy is pruning his tree, dropping the prunings right below the tree, chop and drop, and leaf drop's fine too. So he's enhancing the fertility and the sponge-like water-absorbing characteristics of his landscape. These are photos of a housing development in Tucson that have incorporated a lot of these strategies. The upper left photo is when it was still under construction. The roofs drain to the common landscape. That's what you're seeing. There's a raised pathway that keeps everyone's feet high and dry, but that pathway breaks up the common landscape into a whole series of 18 to 24-inch deep basins, rain gardens. Now, this is before anything was planted, and these are high clay soils, so very slow percolation rate. So it would have been an issue with standing water and mosquitoes if we'd left it that way. But we put in the sponge. So we put 4 inches of organic matter over the surface and planted living pumps of vegetation. Then we get 2 inches of rain falling in less than an hour. And with the sponge in place, all of that rain infiltrated in less than an hour. No puddles, no mosquitoes, no problems there. And the photograph on the lower right shows you how much things have grown since. So this landscape is irrigated only, now that it's established, it's only irrigated with on-site rainwater and household so-called wastewater. This is an overview of the whole site. The slope is from the lower left corner to the top right corner. The rectangles with the numbers are the buildings. The shaded areas in between the buildings are the basins, and the circles are trees. So we had a civil engineer add up the cumulative storage capacity of all the microbasins, all those rain gardens within the landscape. And he found that that exceeded the flood control capacity of a conventional system by 10 times. There are no storm drains at the bottom of the site, no big detention basins at the bottom of the site, because the landscape itself holds all the water. So this is not only a superior flood control system, but it is also the foundation of a water sustainable landscape, where only on-site rainwater and household wastewater turned resource water, that's the only thing used for the irrigation. And this produces a lot of food. We chose a lot of food plants, so we're also enhancing the food security and the nutritional value of what people are consuming. Okay, so, whoops, jumped too fast. Oh, I seem to have lost my arrows. If we can go back 2 slides, I seem to have lost my ability to go back. That went forward. Oh, there we go. It's back. Okay, good. Great. Okay, so when we do these rain gardens, these basins, people oftentimes ask, well, how would I know what to plant within them? The answer to that is go take a hike to your local intact ecosystem and see what species of plants naturally grow in the low spots, periodically inundated with water and sediment. That's what you want to plant in those areas. So I've broken it down into rain garden zones. Bottom of the basin for more water tolerant and water needy plants. The terrace, less water needy and tolerant, and then top, the least water tolerant and needy. So real simple way to lay things out. And one thing I want to hit home here, big needed policy shift in California and elsewhere where there's turf removal programs. Just removing turf and replacing it with other vegetation will not enable us to get off of the addiction to imported high-cost water. So I think if there's a turf removal program, when the turf is removed, the microtopography of the landscape must be changed to basin-like water harvesting shapes before it's revegetated with more drought-tolerant vegetation. So this would be an example of that. Okay, so now we'll go to the next slide. I can move that forward. Okay, this would be an example of, on the left, you might have a lawn here, it's a tree and some shrubs, but it's more hill-like draining shape. We want to shift more to what it is on the right. Okay, next slide. Okay, let's now talk about the idea of a landscape living within the on-site water budget. Now, in southern Arizona, a small house, you might have 9,000 gallons of water coming off your roof in a typical year. That would just be a 1,000 square foot home. That would be enough water to freely irrigate 3 native food-bearing shade trees, 20 foot tall and wide, each needing 3,000 gallons of water a year. And all I need for the irrigation system is just these basin rain garden-like shapes. Direct the water to them. But if I want a higher water use plant, like a citrus tree that needs 8,000 gallons of water a year, upper right, I only get 1 tree, not 3, because I'm trying to live within that 9,000 gallon rainwater income budget. And the citrus tree is not adapted to drought like native plants, so it needs supplemental irrigation in the dry time. Well, I can do that with a gravity-fed gray water system from my bathroom sink and shower. And then if I want a garden, a vegetable garden, well, I don't want to use gray water in the vegetable garden. It's fine for fruit trees. So instead I put in a rainwater tank. I stole the water out from the tank. So more cost with a tank than earthworks, but this enables me to have that garden just on on-site water. So that works great. All these scenarios, they're living within the on-site water budget. But now we can take it further. What if we take that rainwater and direct it into the home before the landscape? Well, we could send that roof runoff to the washing machine, to the laundry, and we get 750 loads of clothes washed with that roof runoff, and then send the gray water to the landscape. Or we could send the roof runoff to the shower and get 900 5-minute showers, and then send the water to the gray water to the landscape. This is how we get a lot more without consuming any more. And this slide shows you a breakdown of water use, drinking water use in a typical household in Tucson. It's fairly similar to California. So you can see the biggest chunk of the pie is outdoor irrigation. But if you look at on the right, you can see the 3 pieces of pie of the washing machines, the faucets, and the shower. That comes really close to meeting a good chunk of that outdoor need. So gray water, along with rainwater, is a great thing to tap. So next slide. Okay. So let's say all your plumbing's encased in a concrete floor. You can't get to it. Well, you could set up an outdoor shower like the guy in the upper left photo. And in the summer months, when you need a shower and your plants need the water, all works great. Or if you can access your plumbing, you can do like the illustration, and you can direct the drain water to a 3-way valve that lets you either send the water to the landscape or the sewer, depending on what goes down the drain, or the condition and saturation of your soil outside. I advocate gravity-fed gray water systems that distribute the water right to the soil of the landscape. The soil and the vegetation are the filter. There's no tank, there's no pump, there's no mechanical filtration. So it's very inexpensive, low maintenance, works great for the client, the homeowner. And it's very accessible that way. You got to use the right soaps if you're using gray water. So at the link on my website, you can get more information on that. And I just want to point out a thing with health. I find that my clients that harvest gray water, their health improves because they change the soaps and detergents they use. The ones they used to use that would kill their soil and landscape, they stop using. And their health improves because the stuff that's harmful to the soil and the plants can also be harmful to us. So next slide. One way you can access the gray water of a washing machine is you already have a drain pipe to the sewer. You can add 1 or 2 additional pipes, each labeled with the fruit tree that the pipe will direct the water to. And every time you do a load of wash, you take the drain hose from the back of your washer and you stick it in a different pipe. So every time you do a load of wash, the water is directed to a different tree. This distributes the water to many points rather than always sending it to one spot, so the soil stays aerobic, well oxygenated, and doesn't stink, and everything works great. And if you happen to wash diapers or use something toxic in terms of a detergent, you can send things back to the sewer. Next slide. Now in Tucson, Arizona, there's a new ordinance mandating that all new homes must be built with gray water harvesting stub outs to make it easier for people to utilize their gray water. So what's a stub out? Well, let's first talk about what it's not. It's not the pipe going to the sewer. What it is a section of pipe in your wall and or floor put in at the time of construction that you can hook up to. You can hook up to that pipe, send it out to your landscape. And so if someone moves into the home and wants to harvest their gray water, they don't have to jackhammer their floor or cut through the wall. The pipe's there waiting behind an access hatch. They just hook it up and they're all ready to go. And to make this even more accessible, we have a $1,000 rebate to harvest gray water in Tucson. And it's key to have that 3-way valve, ideally in the same room where you generate the gray water. So It's really easy to interface with it rather than having to walk outside or get under the floor where it'll be out of sight, out of mind. Okay. Now, another water use that we should be looking at is about 30% of the drinking water consumed in a house is in the toilet. And I think it's kind of madness that we put drinking water in the toilet, and then as soon as we use the toilet, immediately turn it into sewage. So this turns a pristine resource, drinking water, into a dangerous waste, sewage. I'd rather turn wastes into resources. And one way we can do that is with composting toilets. So in the lower right, that's my household's brown gold, our thoroughly composted human waste. We're working with the University of Arizona and with an EPA grant. We've piloted a bunch of site-built compost toilets that are very affordable, much less costly than a manufactured one. And we're finding the results are incredible. They far exceed the standards for composting and whatnot. We have no problem with fecal matter E. coli once the composting process is done. So we truly have a closed nutrient loop with this. Okay, next slide. Now another water source we can tap on site, a free water source, is air conditioning condensate. Now air conditioners are extremely energy consumptive. That's the whole issue there. And another big issue with air conditioners is the greenhouse gas potential of the refrigerant used. It's actually absolutely insane. It's so much worse than carbon dioxide. But we could change refrigerant, but that's another talk. In the meantime, as long as air conditioners are being used, atmospheric moisture is condensing on the coil of the unit, and that's basically distilled water. So salt-free. So that water can be accessed. In a dry season or dry climate, just a one-room air conditioner like this is only going to generate a quarter gallon a day. But in a humid season or humid climate, it could be up to 18 gallons a day. And for a commercial unit, it could be hundreds of gallons a day. So here's an example at the University of Arizona at the architecture building where a number of these things are being integrated and applied. So off the roof, about 50,000 gallons of rainwater is harvested each year. That goes both into the landscape and an 11,000 gallon tank within the building. In addition to that rainwater, about 100,000 gallons of air conditioning condensate are harvested each year, just coming off those air conditioning units. The gray water from the drinking fountains, lower left corner, goes to the landscape. And as a result, they've generated this beautiful living classroom that's, I find, far more enticing than the indoor classrooms, that is not using any virgin imported water, but is rather using the so-called wastewaters of the building. And here on the left, you see the cistern within the building. And then there's a water feature, circulating water out of the tank for a water feature. Within that pond, they're raising endangered fish and frogs. And so it's become this wonderful oasis within the urban core. Next slide. They've broken up concrete drainage ways, like you see on the left, left all the concrete in place, put in a few native rocks on the right, and then planted the vegetation. All that vegetation is now irrigated for free by the water that infiltrates between the concrete chunks. So super simple irrigation system, turning a drainage system into an infiltration system. And this is an overview of the site. The green part on the left is the landscape I've been talking about. Paved area on the right. The plan is to convert that to the second largest green park on campus, irrigated same way as the example on the left, just with the water from the roofs and drains of the buildings. And if you look at it, the parking lot's like a canyon bottom, and the rooftops are like mesa tops. So we can mimic that natural landform and use the mesas, the rooftops, to irrigate the canyon bottom. So replacing asphalt with more vegetation or shading that asphalt is key. So we can turn the heat island effect into the cool island effect. And this chart with the numbers, this is from Los Angeles. If you look in the blue, you see the average annual income of rainfall is 14 inches a year. But the potential loss to evaporation is 75 inches a year. So anything we can do to reduce that evaporative loss is key. And reducing temperatures, great strategy. Shading, vegetation, mulch, windbreaks, all that's great. So we can use the pavement to provide the water source for that shading. So we've been doing cutting of street curbs to allow street runoff to enter into street side basins to irrigate street side trees. Turns out the average residential street in Tucson drains over 1 million gallons of rainfall falling on the street per mile per year. That's enough water to freely irrigate over 400 native food-bearing shade trees per mile per year, while reducing flooding downstream, creating more cool, walkable neighborhoods. And the city of Tucson has passed a new Green Streets policy that says all new city streets and those being redone must harvest at minimum a half-inch rainstorm's worth of water, either within the public right-of-way or medians within the street. So this flips the street infrastructure from being a 100% drainage of water to now a water infiltrating and vegetation shading generating infrastructure. And the city of Tucson also mandates that all commercial landscapes must harvest at minimum, must harvest enough rainwater to provide at least 50% of the landscape's irrigation needs. So we've been so successful along these streets with the curb cuts, we're getting a lot of vegetation growing. And then we got to prune that vegetation to keep streets and pathways walkable and traversable. 12 to 14% of the city's solid waste stream is yard trimmings. That's the sponge. That's our fertility. Why put that in the dump and generate methane? So we have programs, free pruning workshops, showing people how to prune stuff up, put it into the basins under the tree, and grow more vegetation. I'm going to skip by this one. Studies at the university found that these street-side basins harvesting street runoff with organic mulch grew trees 33% larger than those without, doubled the tree's potential sequestration of carbon, enabled the soil to sequester more carbon due to the more soil life, and increased the soil's ability to naturally filter street pollutants to a point that's 10 times greater than street-side basins with rock as opposed to organic mulch. Okay, real quick, we can also work with the sun. So in the winter, the sun is lower in the sky, always in the southern part of the sky. In the summer, the sun rises in the northeast, sets in the northwest, and as it traverses much more of the sky. Working with these seasonally changing sun patterns, we can correctly orient our homes like the upper left, where the long wall faces south, the winter sun, and the short wall faces the rising and setting sun. So this way, we dramatically reduce our heating and cooling needs. So on the left shows a building with the ideal orientation, showing you how the sun and shadow play throughout the day in summer and winter. And on the right shows you the non-ideal orientation. So the city of Sacramento put minimum maximum thermometers in 2 buildings identical in every way except their orientation to the sun. And they found that with this correct orientation, the long wall facing south, short walls facing east and west, after a full year of monitoring, the indoor temperatures were 17 degrees cooler in summer and 24 degrees cooler in summer and 17 degrees warmer in winter than this orientation. It's a huge difference, and no mechanical systems needed. So I think we need to have policy mandating correct orientation of buildings for passive heating and cooling. Along with correct orientation, we can size our overhangs correctly with correct window sizing, so that here in the upper left, we get full sun on the south side of the house and through the south-facing windows for free heat, light gain in the winter. But in the summer, lower right photo, everything's shaded for passive cooling. Works great. No mechanical systems. Okay. Then we can combine correct orientation with correct roof overhang with correct landscape orientation. So here we see we have trees on the east, north, and west side of the house, open to the south, so it shades out the rising and setting, morning and afternoon sun in summer, but lets in all winter sun. So we get the sun when we need it, the shade when we need it. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip by this one. We can also practice solar rights, where we ensure that one building, say on the south side, does not shade out the building to the north of its winter sun access. The state of New Mexico's got the best solar rights laws in the country, and they prevent this from happening. This is in a so-called solar village in Tucson, where every home has solar panels, solar hot water heater, and south-facing windows. But this building on the south totally shades out in the winter months the solar panels, solar hot water heater, and south-facing windows of this building, negating the effectiveness of those solar strategies. If solar rights were enforced, that wouldn't have been a problem. So I want to show you how we're incorporating a lot of this stuff in a transformation of a neighborhood. This is the house my brother and I bought in 1994 in this downtown Tucson neighborhood, and much of the community looked like this. Just the public right-of-way was a bare solar oven-like experience, and there was a lot of infighting in the neighborhood politically, I think in part because people wouldn't greet and see one another. So we wanted to change that. So we went door to door, talking to neighbors, asking what they'd like to see. Everyone wanted to see more trees, more life, more interaction. So outside of the neighborhood meetings, we organized a neighborhood tree planting. We planted over 200 trees that first year, and we've been planting every year since. So we planted over 1,400 trees since 1996. So we get everyone out volunteering together, planting the trees. We get the trees at a reduced price, and we select native food-bearing trees because they're really easy to succeed. They're the best adapted for the area. Immediately the neighborhood feels transformed where this is done. More neighbors know one another. They can say hello. We can look out for one another. And people see that people care because trees have gone in. We have food before and after to get people together. And we also we plant the trees within basins to harvest the rainwater. Then we've cut the street curb to allow street runoff into the street side basins. This used to be illegal, but we have now gotten to the point where it's been legalized in the city and mandated. And if you don't do curb cuts, you can do curb cores. It's just a 4-inch diameter hole through the curb. It's cheaper, but more likely to clog because of the smaller opening, but easy to unclog. So by planting the water, planting the trees, and directing street runoff into those basins, in 10 years, we converted what's the image in the upper left to what you see in the lower right. All that vegetation in the lower right is now irrigated only with direct rainfall and street runoff. No groundwater, no city water, no imported water. So we've flushed the salts out of the soil. And 90% of the species are native to the Tucson Basin. So we've regrown the habitat for native wildlife. When we moved to the neighborhood in the upper left, the only wildlife we had were exotic pigeons. Now that we've got so much native plant life, we've got over 24 native bird species and many more migrating throughout the year. So this really helps connect us to a sense of place rooted to the Sonoran Desert ecosystem. It's very low maintenance and easy to care for. And we have much less crime because people are walking up and down the street now. We know many more of our neighbors because it's really pleasant to be out and about. You want to be out and about. So we talk, we interact. People's health is improving because we're more physical, not just planting the trees, but walking and biking. We put up a before photo where we took the photo so anyone walking by can see the difference. And we selected, again, not only vegetation native for wildlife, but that produces food. We looked at the ethnobotanical record. So we harvest the mesquite pods from the mesquite tree. The pods, like many wild foods, they slow the body's intake of sugar. So it's great for people with hypoglycemia and diabetes. And we grind those pods into flour, which we can sell for $14 a pound. It's that delicious, that nutritious, and that sought after. We have honey from our backyard bees, prickly pear syrup from the prickly pear fruit, chiltepines from the wild chili plant, olives from the olive tree, and cholla buds from the cholla cactus. All that food grown for free, only with on-site rainwater and what was previously a sterile strip of nothing. And this out harvesting encourages you to linger more in the public realm, get to know the neighbors, build community, more interaction, and so on, while reducing flooding downstream. We then took it further because some of these wild foods, people don't know how to use them, so and the traditional means are kind of laborious. So we got a hammer mill, farm-scale hammer mill, we put on a trailer that can rapidly grind up 5 gallons of whole mesquite pods into 1 gallon of flour in 5 minutes. And you can sell the resulting flour for $70 or just eat it for free. So people are making $25 an hour just picking these foods, processing them, and selling them in the neighborhood, never leaving the neighborhood. We put this cookbook together to show people how to do it. And art is another component. So we are calming the speed of traffic by creating these water harvesting chicanes or pullouts coming into the street, narrowing the street, slowing down traffic, making it safer for cyclists and walkers. And at the same time, this traffic calming is a water harvesting strategy, harvesting stormwater. And within it, we put a sculpture of the fish that used to be in the Santa Cruz River that's just a quarter mile away, and now it's a dry riverbed. But less than 100 years ago, you could walk from any house in the neighborhood, fish your dinner, take a swim, and come back and cook it up. So this is what we lost. But within the fish is a horned lizard. My nephew's on top of it. Is the horned lizard is adapted to dry conditions and evolved to the point that it harvests rainwater off its back when it rains. It flares out its back, lifts its rear legs. The rainwater travels through gutters between its scales right to its mouth. So we can learn from this life form and in other ways harvest our free on-site rainwater. And last 3 slides here. City of Tucson with the county and the local nonprofit Watershed Management Group has looked at how these strategies reduce flooding in these 3 sub-watersheds. Found a 40% peak flow reduction or in a big storm, or 25% flow reduction in a normal storm. And this was just converting 25% of people's unpaved section of yard. So this would be a single-family household. There's the house, outbuildings, the green, that's where the rain gardens were put. They looked at a cost-benefit ratio and found direct benefits to cost would be $3 to every dollar spent. Now, that would be like instant water savings, energy savings as the vegetation grew. But then the not so direct would be more health savings on reduced health stress and whatnot. That was even bigger benefit to cost. Along the street, it ranged from about $2 to $3 benefit for every dollar spent to do street side basins and tree plantings. And I've got the links on here if you guys want to look at this report. Then for more comprehensive street side water harvesting, that was about $1.50 to $2 benefit to $1 cost. And the only thing that didn't pan out with a cost-benefit ratio was removing existing asphalt. There the benefits were less than the cost because of the cost of asphalt removal. And this is why it's so important whenever we can do this from the get-go, change our development standard policy as the city of Tucson has to do it right in the first place. So you can get a bunch more information in my books and on this website, but I want to go to a few policy recommendations. This is probably too much to read in the brief time I've got left, but I'm just going to say I think a great question to ask when we're looking at policy change is, what is the overall desired effect? And I think that's an important question to ask to ensure we're on the right track and we're thinking of the big picture at the same time we're looking at the details. And I propose that we look at always trying to enhance the living systems, the ecological systems, ecological foundation upon which our very existence depends and all our communities depend. I started this talk talking about how Tucson has an over 4,000-year history of continuous farming. Tucson exists because of that river that used to flow year-round and its once shallow groundwater table. We need policy that helps bring back that foundation that enabled us to exist in the first place and can enable us to exist in the future. So and by doing so, we enhance the health of our citizens at the same time. So here's a few things with sun and shade harvesting policy recommendations. At minimum, I think we should create development standards and zoning planning that maintains solar rights and solar easements, so everyone can passively heat, light, and power their buildings if they choose to. And in so doing, we can also incentivize and mandate ideal solar orientation, not only of buildings, but also landscapes. And every community, every building should have guidelines for ideal south-facing or winter sun-facing window sizing to overhang length, in addition to proper window selection. So you can go to these pages. My book shows you how to do all this, so that we can use our windows and our roof to heat and cool our homes at the right time. There's the majority of the low E windows that are on the market now, they are only looking at mechanically heated and cooled buildings. They're not looking at the potential passive solar heating in winter. So the typical low E windows, they wipe out any potential for passive solar heating of one's home with south-facing windows. So we have to make sure the window suppliers carry the right type of low E window, and that we promote this at our the review desks, at our plan reviews. We have to put this information out. So I've got more info on this link in my books on that. And then when it comes to tree placement, let's place trees where they shade us in the east and west in summer, but don't shade our south-facing windows. More info on this link, and you guys can go back to slides I didn't have time to show on that. Sorry about that. Limited time. Then in terms of rainwater harvesting, let's increase required tree canopy in the built environment. When the city of Tucson mandated that commercial landscapes need to provide at least 50% of their water needs with harvested rainwater, they simultaneously doubled the required tree canopy, and did all in a way that can be done just with passive earthworks and rain gardens. No tanks needed, so it's not any undue financial burden. So let's ensure that our hardscapes drain to our landscaped areas, so that rainwater is the water that also controls flooding. Let's recycle our on-site organic mulch rather than using rock or gravel as ground cover. So we're reducing waste, turning it into a resource, creating the sponge-like effect, enhancing the fertility of the soil, its ability to absorb and hold water. We're feeding the living system rather than mining mountains to get the rock. Here's a link to the Green Streets policy in Tucson. Here's a link to some good information on legalizing and incentivizing retrofitting of streets by putting curbs and curb cores. Mentioned before, I think turf removal programs must also require changing the microtopography of landscapes to be bowl-like harvesting topography as opposed to hill-like draining topography. Rain barrels that I see there incentivized a lot. Rain barrels, in my opinion, they're too small. It's just play. It's not the real thing. They fill up too quickly and you empty them too quickly. So incentivizing rainwater tanks is great. I think we should first mandate the passive earthworks because they work whether you're home or not. All the water that infiltrates a rain garden by the next storm will be infiltrated. It's all ready to go again. Whereas if your tank filled up in the storm yesterday and we get another storm, it won't help you with flood control. And if we do tanks, let's make sure we size them to the catchment area. So let's at least incentivize tanks sized to capture the water from a good storm coming off your roof. And I'm going to point out to one idea in South Korea where they're pushing 3 tanks in every building. And they say 1 for me, 1 for you, and 1 for everyone. Meaning, 1 tank is for me to use the water however I want. 2, the second tank is for you. I collect water in that tank that would otherwise drain downstream and flood you. So that helps you. And I use that water up before the next rain. The third tank is for everyone. I don't touch that water. It's emergency reserve. So if there's an earthquake, attack, whatever catastrophe you want to choose, every building has a reserve water in its basement. Okay. There's some, I think I'm running out of time here. In Australia, they mandate all new homes be built with rainwater tanks hooked up to the outdoor faucets, laundry, and toilet. It's not drinking water. It's just going to the laundry, landscape, and toilet, so that you don't have to purify it so much. And when the tank empties, mains water goes into the tank just a little bit. So you always have water, but anytime you have rainwater, that's what's used. Okay, and then I'd love to see we delineate our political boundaries by watershed boundaries. And don't have enough time to describe that, but go to this link and it'll show you great potential with that. So, and here's some gray water harvesting policy, and I just want to check in with you all. Should I continue to talk about this, or should we go to question and answers? This is the last slide, but I don't want to be going over more than I should.
Brad, go ahead. Go ahead and finish this one up. This is great.
Okay. So what's the most dangerous thing we can do with gray water? I think it's turn it into black water. So rather than sending our less contaminated gray water into the same stream as black water and turning it all into black water, let's separate out the gray water before it ever interfaces with the black water. It's way easier then to manage on-site with low-tech, low-cost, low-maintenance strategies. As I mentioned before, Tucson is now mandating gray water harvesting stub-outs in all new home construction. I think that's a great strategy because it makes it convenient, less expensive for people to access this strategy. Now, we also have rebates for harvesting gray water. It's a $1,000 rebate, and for rainwater, $2,000 rebate for rainwater. But to get the rebate, you have to go through a 3-hour course for either rebate, which is great because people are then educated, less likely to be ripped off by people trying to capitalize on the rebate for tanks. People see what needs to be in place for a working, effective, functional system, and how to set up a system so it'll be convenient for them to use so they will actually use it. That's been key. Also educate people on the correct soaps and detergents to use with the gray water systems. And a big thing we need in the bigger system change is we need to incentivize soap and detergent manufacturers to produce truly gray water compatible soaps and detergents. Now, unfortunately, there's many products out there and companies marketing so-called biodegradable gray water friendly soaps. They are not, because they are too high in salts, sodium based ingredients, which is not a good thing in our already salty soil in the western United States, where we have these saltier soils due to our low rainfall. So we need to get the manufacturers producing different products. And if you go to the gray water harvesting page of my website, I link to the good stuff, the bad stuff, and what we need to look at to change. And finally, let's also legalize the use of site-built composting toilets. You can get a manufactured compost toilet, but we've found that site-built toilets work much better, they're higher capacity, and the compost is a higher quality too, so it's more accessible. And you get more information on that link and my books too. So I should stop at that and take some questions before I burn through the last of the time. And thanks so much for the opportunity to see y'all.
Brad, thank you. My mind is just swirling with so many ideas and connections. And I think what really stands out for us in public health is just seeing how your strategies have so many multiple wins, whether it's looking at emergency preparedness as an extra benefit in terms of water, community engagement, whether it's looking at strategies for heat islands and traffic calming through the integration with water, or the use and then commercial value of native plants. So it's amazing. We do have a question here. Carla, do you want to come on board and unmute yourself? No. Let's see here. When you were talking about that, she was asking, are there examples of how systems can be scaled up for multifamily or higher density communities? Yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely. So when I was showing that system by the University of Arizona Landscape Building, that could just as easily be a multifamily building. And so yes, this all works great. In terms of the gray water systems, you either send the gray water to a more complex centralized distribution system, or it's only the ground floor people with a yard that have the gray water access outside the apartments. Inside the apartments, a bucket to chuck it system can be used where the gray water just goes right to their toilet, so you flush your toilet with gray water. So there's lots of options. Some of this stuff, if you go to the blog on my website and look up the blog on what renters can do, gives a number of strategies for that. And I also just want to say, as the next question is being pulled up, what I really try and focus on is systems that show and celebrate the flow. So trying to encourage, put in infrastructure and systems that everyone can see. It's not hidden behind a wall, a floor, or underground. So anyone can observe it while it's functioning, see how it works, and then replicate and improve upon it. And one other thing I want to say too, when I showed the street runoff harvesting, some of you might be thinking, what about the pollutants coming off the street? Wouldn't that be bad for the food plants? It doesn't hurt the food plants, but we don't grow leafy greens, tubers, or any harvestable food that would come in direct contact with that street runoff because of the pollutants coming off the street. We're just promoting woody perennial plants where the food that you harvest is up in the plant, not direct contact with the water. And Mitch Pavlo-Zuckerman, the researcher I linked on the slide about that, he found no contaminant uptake in the woody perennials. We need to do more research, but his initial research has been very positive.
Great. I think I'll just ask one quick question here and then turn it back over to Katie to close us out. I guess one of the questions that I've got is around these really innovative policies that you've been able to get adopted, and I'm wondering if you can just say a brief word about that and who was the main driver and what that interaction was like.
Well, with all this, it was many people in many realms working. So a lot of citizen activists proving proof of concept on the ground. Also working with folks at the university to get data, research showing how things are working, finding allies within the various city, county, and state departments that could then guide us through the process of how to make change. So we were generating political will as the general populace was becoming more aware of this, demanding it, and then we were working with policymakers that were open to this. And when we would meet together, we would all bring up what our concerns, issues were, and rather than just trying to push our own individual agenda, we were always striving to see how the various strategies could meet as many of the needs as possible. And this is a big reason why I'm pushing the integrated approach, where, say, the traffic calming also harvests stormwater, also grows vegetation to shade and cool the street, is done with the community to reduce crime and get more community investment, growing food to enhance food security, native plants to enhance wildlife habitat. So just by thinking of the bigger picture and how we can really tap to the inherent on-site potential that's already here, using what's already here, how far can we take it? And so we just keep challenging each other in a positive way, seeing can we go further.
Great. Thank you, Brad. And all of these things, when you look at them, it is abundant. It is more beautiful. It really adds something on so many levels. So, Katie, I'm going to turn it over to you to close this out, and thank Brad very much for joining us and kind of opening our eyes to so many of the strategies that you've used.
You
Great.
bet.
Yeah,
well,
thank you
thanks
so
again
much,
for the
Brad.
opportunity.
Great to have you on with us. And I just wanted to remind everybody of our upcoming webinar. Our next one is taking place October 28th, and we'll be looking at what's happening in state policies moving pretty fast. What are the implications for local health departments? Where are the new funding opportunities? So please mark that on your calendars. And the last one of the series on November 18th. Hope you can join us. So just leave it there. We will get out a follow-up email to everybody with some additional resources and links. And thank you very much for joining today. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.